Okay, so I've got my composition sketched out, and I'm pretty okay with most of the lights and darks. I have to add some more shadows and things like that. But what I want to talk to you very quickly about is materials. I'm using this cheap railroad board to work on. I find it works pretty well for this type of painting. I'm using acrylic paints for this, and you're going to want to go ahead and we're just going to work in grayscale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also I want to talk very briefly about brushes. I commonly see individuals that I'm talking to pick up just any old brush in the room. So they'll take one of these very nice bamboo brushes, or they'll take, let me show you what the other one is. Oh, I lost it, of course. Oh, here it is. One of these brushes. These are actually watercolor brushes. They have a much softer bristle, and they're really intended for much wetter materials, and in fact the acrylic paints damage the bristles of these brushes and they don't work very well. So it ruins the brush, and also you don't have the same kind of control over the paint that you really want. So I would just not use these brushes at all for this material, this medium. Instead, what you want to go for is a kind of a harder square, it doesn't have to be square, but a harder bristle brush like this. These are intended for acrylic paint. They come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes, as you can see, and obviously depending on what you're doing, you might find that one of these brushes works better for a specific task. But I just got a couple of these to show you. And when you get started, because we're working with grayscale, this will just make life so much easier for you. I would get some black paint and some white paint, and you're going to start by making a set of each of those. And then what I like to do, because I'm working with grayscale, is work smarter not harder. So I've got my black and my white. I'll just put those aside for now. And for these, I'm going to start by adding a whole lot of white to this first one, a whole lot of white to the second one, and maybe like a little bit less white to the third one. And you'll see why in just a minute. And then I'm going to go back to my black paint. And for the first bucket, I'm going to be careful about how I squeeze this. Come on. Okay. You see that? It's hardly any black paint. Maybe like a pea. It's even maybe too much. Second one, a little bit more. Maybe like 2 peas worth. Okay? So you can see that there's a little bit more in that one. And then for the third one, I'm going to probably put maybe triple that amount in. There we go. Okay, so clearly you can still see the ratio of black to white is very different. Now, if I had been smart about this, I would have gotten some kind of cardboard chipboard to mix these up. I didn't get one, so I'll just use a brush. And I think what I'm going to do is, because I don't want to keep washing my brush out, is I'll start with the first one, the lightest one, with the least amount of black. And I'm just going to very thoroughly stir that up. And you can see that even though I added a very tiny amount of black paint to this, I'm still getting a pretty light gray. It's obviously not white anymore. It's amazing how just a little bit of like a dark color, not just black, but any dark color mixed with white goes a long way. So just be aware of that when you're mixing your paints. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And what I should get in theory, and I can always tweak this if I need to, is a much darker gray. And I'm not quite so happy with the change of gray there, but let's see what I get with the third one before I make any decisions to tweak this and change it around. So the third gray should be my darker gray. And that's alright, I guess. I can always decide to make it a fourth gray if I want to. But that's pretty much what you want. It's just a basic kit of colors here that you can use. This is your spectrum. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And since I have all this gray on my brush, I might as well just go ahead and work with that. One thing I do want to mention to you though is I do have a bucket of water ready to go, and I also have paper towel over here. Something I've noticed is that a lot of individuals will have a ton of paint on their brush, and also they'll dip their brush in the water over here, and then it'll be sopping wet, and then they'll put the water, the wet brush back into their paint. I highly recommend not doing that. I find it's a lot easier to work with this paint if your brush is actually relatively dry. It doesn't have to be totally dry, just between times, just take a moment if your brush is wet and just brush it off clean it off with a paper towel, but I want to keep this. So I'm taking a look at this, and I'm trying to figure out where do I want to start. And maybe I'm going to start with like some of the darker areas. And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to paint these just yet, and if I'm going to change them, but I think you pretty much get the idea. So I'm going to start coming in here. And I do want to mention that when you're painting with these, I can still see unfortunately, the pencil underneath, so I might have to go back and do a couple coats to really get this to work. But I'm just going to start by laying down some basic values to this. And this is where, again, I think if you were working off of a photo, this would be extremely helpful. I'm not, and I'm sort of lost here in terms of how to work this. But I recommend actually starting with like the extreme lights and extreme darks.